Have you ever felt it? That quiet, restless pull, somewhere between the moments of laughter and the hours of doubt, in the silence before sleep, in the vast emptiness of space between thoughts. That unshakable feeling that there's more than the morning traffic, more than the late-night worries, more than the endless scroll of social media feeds that leave you feeling oddly disconnected. What if all of this was a whisper, a gentle call from something or someone far greater than we dare imagine? From the dawn of humanity, we've lifted our eyes to the stars and wondered, is anyone out there? Do I matter? Why am I here? We built temples and shrines. We sang hymns. We painted gods on cave walls and ceiling frescoes. We debated in Greek forums and whispered prayers under desert skies. Some called it God. Some called it the universe. Others called it simply the mystery. But the question remains, unchanged, burning, ancient. Who or what is the source behind everything? You're here now, reading these words, and that's not by accident. Perhaps something in you is stirring, something old, something sacred. This book isn't about converting you to a religion. It isn't here to tell you what to believe. It's an invitation to explore, to question, to remember. Remember that before you were an adult weighed down by expectations, you were a child asking big questions about life and death and stars and angels. Somewhere along the way, between paying bills and chasing deadlines, you might have buried those questions, but they never stopped living inside you. This book is about the Father Universal, not just a God in the sky, but a living presence, a creative force that knows you intimately and calls you to awaken. It draws from an ancient and profound text, the Urantia Book, but goes beyond its pages. We'll explore philosophy, psychology, science, and spirituality. We'll bring in voices from East and West, from the serene wisdom of the Tao to the cosmic wonder of quantum physics, from a contemplative silence of Buddhist monks to the passionate sermons of Christian mystics. We'll wrestle with paradoxes. We'll sit in the tension between reason and faith. And most importantly, we'll make it personal, because this isn't just about theology. It's about your life, your breath, your purpose. So before we dive in, here's what I ask. Read with your heart open. Pause when something resonates. Question when something feels too big to grasp. But stay with me. Walk with me through this journey. By the time you turn the last page, you might just discover that the God you've been searching for has been searching for you all along. And if you're enjoying this so far, take a moment to support this journey. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Together, let's build a community of seekers, because every day we'll have new content to nourish the soul. Chapter 1. Why we still talk about God. We live in an age where everything seems available at the tap of screen. Information, entertainment, endless opinions, all flowing like a river of noise we barely have time to process. You wake up, check your phone, messages, notifications, breaking news, a video going viral. Then coffee, traffic, work, bills, distractions. By evening, you scroll through social feeds, feeling more disconnected than ever, despite being constantly connected. And yet, amid the noise, there it is again. That familiar, unsettling ache. A restlessness that no playlist, no binge-watch series, no online shopping spree seems able to quiet. You stare at the ceiling late at night and wonder, is this all there is? Is there something more? This isn't just your question. It's humanity's oldest question, dressed now in 21st century anxieties. A question whispered by ancient desert prophets, echoed by Greek philosophers, and sung by monks in mountaintop monasteries. We've changed our clothes and technologies, but our longing remains the same. Some call it an existential crisis. Psychologists might label it existential dread, the quiet terror that life could be random, meaningless, a cosmic accident. But deep down, most of us sense otherwise. We feel that life means something, even when we can't explain what. We sense that there's a story unfolding, and that somehow we're characters in it. Alan Watts, one of the great spiritual communicators of the 20th century, often spoke of this tension. He described the modern human as a being desperately looking for meaning in a world that feels mechanical and indifferent. But what's also offered hope? He reminded us, the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. Yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. And perhaps that's why we still talk about God. Not because tradition forces us to, not because dogma demands it, but because deep inside, we know there's something or someone more. For some, God remains a word too heavy with old meanings. Images of angry sky fathers, lists of rules, distant judgments. For others, God is a philosophical puzzle, an abstract first cause debated in academic halls. And then there are those for whom God is an experience, a presence felt in moments of deep silence, a whisper during suffering, a sudden wave of gratitude while watching sunlight dance through trees. We keep talking about God because life keeps asking the question, because no matter how advanced our science becomes, no matter how many galaxies we map, no matter how far artificial intelligence evolves, we still come back to the most human of needs, the need to belong to something greater. Thomas Merton, the contemplative monk and writer, once wrote, "We are not at peace with others because we are not at peace with ourselves, and we are not at peace with ourselves because we are not at peace with God." That tension between our daily distractions and our eternal hunger is exactly where this book begins. We don't need to prove God. We don't need to agree on doctrines or creeds, but we do need to acknowledge the truth that beneath the surface of modern life, behind the stress, the overwork, the loneliness masked by curated Instagram smiles, there is still an open wound, a question waiting for an answer, or perhaps a voice waiting for us to listen. Maybe the real problem isn't that people stop believing in God. Maybe the real issue is that the God many people stop believing in never existed in the first place. We've inherited images of God shaped by culture, politics, and human fear. A cosmic judge with a long list of offenses. A distant architect who set the universe spinning and then walked away. A parental figure too preoccupied with rules to care about hearts. And somewhere along the way, we began to feel disconnected, not just from God, but from ourselves. This disconnection gave birth to what existential philosophers like Viktor Frankl called the void. That hollow, aching space where meaning used to live. Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once wrote that man's deepest desire is not for pleasure or power, but for purpose. And when we can't find it, we drift. That drift takes many forms today. We chase success, status, or temporary highs. We fill our calendars and empty our souls. We search for meaning in likes, followers, and online validation. But the human heart isn't fooled for long. In the words of Rumi, the great Sufi poet, "You were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life?" At some point, we all start looking upward again, or inward, because, as Alan Watts often reminded his listeners, the external search will always disappoint until we realize that what we seek has been within us all along. It's a paradox of the spiritual journey. We begin by looking outward toward gods in the sky, scriptures, traditions. And over time, the search turns inward. not to find a small, ego-driven self, but to discover the part of us that has never been separate from the divine. This is where traditional religion often fails the modern seeker. For generations, religions offered external structures, commandments, rituals, temples, churches. But many today feel that these structures, while meaningful for some, no longer answer their deepest spiritual questions. It's not that religion has no value. It's that many are hungry for something more immediate, more experiential, more real. They don't want secondhand faith. They want direct experience. This doesn't mean abandoning tradition. It means moving beyond dogma toward encounter, beyond belief systems into transformation. Eckhart Tolle speaks of this beautifully in The Power of Now, where he says, "You are not separate from the whole. You are one with the sun, the earth, the air. You don't have a life. You are life." It's no surprise that meditation, mindfulness, and contemplative practices have exploded in popularity. People aren't running from God. They're running from versions of God that no longer feel alive. And slowly, many are discovering that God is not a distant figure to be appeased, but a presence to be experienced. In the stillness between breaths, in the kindness of a stranger, in the surrender of suffering, in the simple act of being fully here now. We still talk about God because for all our modern sophistication, we're still human. We still ache for belonging, love, and meaning. We still crave answers to the questions that science, for all its brilliance, cannot answer. Why am I here? What happens when I die? Is there something or someone that loves me, even in my most broken moments? And maybe, just maybe, talking about God isn't about reaching final answers. Maybe it's about keeping the conversation alive, staying curious, staying open, staying human, because the search is holy in itself. And as we step deeper into this book, let's not pretend we're about to solve all the mysteries. Instead, let's agree on this, that for the next few chapters, we'll walk together. We'll hold space for doubt, faith, wonder, and paradox. And most of all, for the possibility that the God we're searching for has been quietly, patiently searching for us all along. Chapter 2, The Great Human Questions. At some point, maybe after a heartbreak, maybe during a sleepless night, maybe in the quiet before dawn, we all find ourselves face to face with the same ancient questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? These questions aren't new. They are as old as consciousness itself. They're the same questions that once stirred the hearts of wandering shepherds in the deserts of Judea, monks in Himalayan caves, philosophers beneath the olive trees of Athens, and seekers under Bodhi trees across Asia. In a modern world, we often drown these questions under layers of distraction. Social media notifications, deadlines, weekend plans, and career goals all act like fog, temporarily obscuring the horizon of our inner landscape. But the fog always lifts eventually, and when it does, there they are again. Those relentless, beautiful questions sitting quietly at the edges of our awareness. Who am I? Am I just this body, this name, this role I play at work, or my family? Am I the sum of my memories? Or is there something more permanent, something untouched by the passing years and changing circumstances? In the Hindu tradition, the Upanishads whisper an answer across millennia. Tatung, thou art that. A reminder that beneath the layers of identity, there exists an unchanging self, a spark of the divine that transcends name and form. The Buddhists, with their radical clarity, respond with something almost the opposite. They speak of anatta, no self, suggesting that the idea of a fixed, permanent self is an illusion. For them, clinging to ego leads only to suffering. The path forward is one of letting go, of surrendering the illusion of control and permanence. In the West, Greek philosophers like Socrates urged us to turn inward and ask, "Know thyself." But what did Socrates mean? Was he pointing toward psychological introspection, or something deeper, a spiritual awareness hidden beneath the mind's chatter? The Christian mystics took this search for identity even further. Figures like St. Augustine wrestled for years with the nature of the soul and its relationship to God. Augustine famously wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." A statement that still echoes in the hearts of millions. So which answer is right? Is the self divine, an illusion, a soul destined for union with God, a psychological construct shaped by upbringing and biology? The Urantia Book offers a perspective that's both cosmic and intimate. It tells us that within each of us resides a fragment of God Himself, a personal, indwelling presence known as the thought adjuster. According to Urantia, this inner presence is not just a metaphor. It is a literal piece of the divine, guiding us, whispering to us, nurturing our spiritual growth. In this view, who we are is not fully answered by any single tradition. We are evolving beings, living a temporary physical life, but housing within us an immortal potential, a spark destined for eternity. And that leads to the second question. Why am I here? What's the point of this existence filled with both beauty and suffering? Is life a random sequence of biological processes, or is there a larger purpose guiding it all? The Buddhists would remind us of dukkha, that life contains suffering, but that suffering can be a teacher. It can awaken us from illusion. The Hindus would speak of dharma, a cosmic duty, a role we are meant to fulfill in this lifetime. Christianity points us toward love and relationship. The two greatest commandments, according to Jesus, are to love God and love others. In that love, purpose is found. The ancient Greeks saw purpose in virtue. For Aristotle, the highest goal of human life was eudaimonia, a state of flourishing that arises when we live in alignment with our highest potentials. In Urantia, it speaks of a universe designed with purpose at every level. It reminds us that we are not cosmic accidents, but intentional creations. Our purpose is nothing less than spiritual growth, personal transformation, and ultimately, union with the divine source from which we came. According to the text, the call to be perfect as God is perfect is not an impossible demand. It's an invitation to participate in an eternal journey of becoming. Our daily struggles, our small moments of kindness, our efforts to choose love over fear, they're all part of this vast, upward spiraling adventure. And finally, where am I going? Perhaps this is the most haunting question of all, because behind it lies our most human fear, death. Is this life all there is? Do we simply flicker out like candles at the end of our days? Many faith traditions offer answers. Christianity speaks of heaven, a place of reunion and peace. Hinduism describes cycles of rebirth, samsara, until the soul achieves liberation, moksha. Buddhism offers nirvana, a cessation of suffering and release from the cycles of existence. In the Urantia Book, it offers something both grand and deeply personal. It describes a multi-stage journey of the soul, a cosmic path of growth, experience, and eventual spiritual ascension. From this material life on Earth, Urantia, to the mansion worlds, then onto the higher spheres of existence, until one day, we stand before the very presence of God at the center of all things. It's not a short journey. It's not an easy one, but it's filled with meaning, with moments of beauty, with countless opportunities for the soul to awaken, expand, and draw closer to its source. And perhaps that's what all the great spiritual traditions have been pointing toward all along. Not that we all follow the same path, but that we're all heading toward the same destination, toward love, toward light, toward God. And maybe, just maybe, as we ask these questions, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? We're already taking the first step. We're already responding to the whisper that calls each of us home. Chapter 3, The First Source and Center. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. Before there were stars, before there were planets spinning in silent orbits, before light ever pierced the darkness, there was something beyond time, beyond space, beyond even our wildest human conception of existence. In the language of the Urantia Book, that something is called the first source and center. But for thousands of years, humanity has used many names. God, the divine, the one, the absolute, the ground of being, and each name is both right and not enough. Because how do you name the source from which all names arise? In the Jewish tradition, God's name was considered so holy, so unutterable, that it was often written only as 4 consonants, YHWH, without vowels, leaving it unpronounceable. A name meant to invoke awe, mystery, and sacred distance. In Hindu philosophy, the Upanishads describe Brahman, the unchanging, infinite, immanent, and transcendent reality, the divine ground of all things. Brahman is not a person, not a deity with form, but the very essence of being itself, the formless from which all forms emerge. And then there's the Tao. The ancient Chinese sages described the Tao as the flow behind all things. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, says the opening line of the Tao Te Ching, meaning, the moment we try to define it, we've already lost it. The Tao is the current beneath the river, the space between the notes of a song, the stillness out of which all movement flows. In Christian tradition, we hear, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." A poetic gesture towards something both knowable and unknowable, both personal and cosmic. Each of these traditions, in their own way, points back to the same intuitive truth. There's a source, a center, an origin that gives rise to all things seen and unseen. The Urantia Book takes this cosmic intuition and wraps in expansive, interstellar language. It presents the first source and center as the absolute origin of all reality, material, mental, and spiritual. According to the Urantia text, everything that exists, every galaxy, every atom, every burst of consciousness, owes its existence to this ultimate source. But the Urantia perspective does more than describe God as the creator. It speaks of God as sustainer, controller, and continuous giver of life. Creation wasn't a single past event. It's ongoing like breath, like heartbeat. Every moment of existence is infused with divine intentionality. God doesn't just wind up the universe like a clockmaker and walk away. Instead, the divine is continually present, holding galaxies in motion, nurturing every leaf that unfolds, every soul that awakens. In many ways, this echoes the words of the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, who once wrote, "God is at home. It is we who have gone out for a walk." The source never left. We did, but the call to return is always there. And while science can describe the mechanics of existence, the how, spiritual inquiry dares to ask the deeper question, the why. Why something instead of nothing? Why does existence exist? The Urantia Book doesn't shy away from that mystery. It answers with boldness, because the nature of the first source and center is to create, to love, to give life. And perhaps, deep within us, that same impulse exists. A longing to create, to love, to participate in the unfolding story of existence. Because we are not separate from a source. We come from it. We are of it. And we are called to return to it, not as lost strangers, but as children finding our way back home. When we speak of God as the first source and center, we're not just referring to the origin point of physical matter, the explosion that sent galaxies spinning across the cosmos. We're speaking of the origin of meaning itself, the birthplace of love, intelligence, will, and beauty. In many Western religious traditions, especially within monotheism, God is often portrayed as sovereign, supreme, and set apart from creation. Judaism speaks of the Almighty as Adonai, the master of the universe. Islam speaks of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, yet transcendent and utterly beyond full human comprehension. In Christianity, God becomes a paradox, both the infinite creator and the intimate father who knows the number of hairs on your head. Jesus calls him Abba, a term that in Aramaic means not just father, but something closer to Papa, a word of deep personal affection. This monotheistic vision paints God as both ultimate power and ultimate love, the sovereign and the intimate, the creator and the companion. But then, when we look eastward again, the language shifts. In Hindu philosophy, Brahman is not a being that watches over creation from a distance. Brahman is creation. The Upanishads describe Brahman as both immanent and transcendent, the thread that weaves through all things and the loom upon which the entire cosmos rests. To meditate upon Brahman is to meditate on the unity beneath diversity, the one that manifests as the many. Similarly, in Taoist thought, the Tao is not a god in the traditional sense. It is the way, the flow, the natural order that cannot be grasped through intellect alone. Lao Tzu reminds us, knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. Both Taoism and Hinduism invite us to release our need to categorize the divine with human limitations. In the Urantia Book, it does something beautiful. It takes elements of all these traditions and weaves them into a cosmic tapestry. It acknowledges the mystery, the transcendence, the majesty of the first source and center. But it also anchors that source in relational terms. God is a person. God is love. God is near. And perhaps most importantly, God lives within each of us through the presence of the indwelling thought adjuster, a personal fragment of divine reality whispering to us from the center of our being. This concept echoes what the Christian apostle Paul once said. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? It resonates with the Sufi poets like Hafiz, who wrote, I am the hole in the flute that the Christ's breath moves through. Listen to this music, and it calls to mind the Zen koans that ask us to seek the face we had before we were born. The first source and center is not just the start of the universe's timeline. It is the sustaining heartbeat of reality. Every breath you take is a continuation of that original creative impulse. Every act of kindness, every burst of laughter, every tear shed in grief, all of it unfolds within the divine field that holds everything always. Perhaps this is why, no matter how far science goes, no matter how many particles we split or galaxies we map, we keep circling back to mystery. We build telescopes to see the farthest stars, and yet we still sit on bedroom floors late at night, whispering ancient questions to the ceiling, not because we lack knowledge, but because the heart knows what the mind forgets. We come from love. We are sustained by love. And in the end, we will return to love. And as we continue this journey through these pages, that's where we'll go next. Deeper into the nature of this God who both transcends and indwells, who both governs galaxies and whispers to us in our solitude. Chapter 4. The Creator and Sustainer of the Universe. Before the first star ignited, before gravity pulled matter into form, before even time itself began to tick, there was a pulse, a will, a choice. Modern physics tells us that the universe burst forth from an event we call the Big Bang, a singularity, a point of infinite density and unimaginable energy exploding into space and time. But where did that singularity come from? What caused the laws of physics to exist in the first place? Why is there something rather than nothing? Science gives us the mechanics, but it doesn't touch the heart of the mystery. The Urantia Book steps into that gap with bold language and cosmic vision. It doesn't speak of a random event or a blind force of nature. It speaks of a conscious creator, the first source and center, who both initiated and continues to sustain all things. This creator is not separate from the energy we observe in the cosmos. Rather, the very energies described in physics, the forces that govern atoms and galaxies alike, are expressions of divine will. In other words, creation is ongoing. Right now, always. The energy that burns in the heart of stars. The gravitational pull that keeps planets in orbit. The quantum fields fluctuating at the subatomic level. All of it is God in action. This echoes what mystics and philosophers have been hinting at for centuries. The ancient Taoists described this sustaining force as the Tao, the Way. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu writes, "All things originate from Tao. They are born of it, nourished by it, shaped by it, and return to it. The Tao flows through all things, yet remains unaffected, untouched. It gives rise, nourishes, and receives, all without effort, all without depletion." Similarly, the Urantia Book describes God not as a distant observer, but as an intimate sustainer of reality. God is not merely the clockmaker who winds the universe and steps back. God is the breath behind every atom's vibration, the silent pulse inside every molecule. In quantum physics, scientists speak of the quantum vacuum, a state of energetic potential from which particles emerge and disappear in a constant dance of existence and non-existence. Some modern spiritual thinkers, like Deepak Chopra, have drawn parallels between this quantum field and the concept of a universal consciousness, a field of pure potentiality. While the Urantia Book doesn't directly reference quantum theory, written long before its full development, its language carries a similar resonance. That beneath all visible reality lies an invisible source, aware, intelligent, loving, and infinitely creative. Theologian Paul Tillich referred to God as the ground of being, suggesting that God isn't just a being among beings, but the very foundation upon which all being exists. This is more than poetry. It's more than metaphor. It's a call to recognize that everything around us, every leaf, every breeze, every breath, is an active, living expression of divine intent. God doesn't create once. God creates always. In the Christian tradition, the Apostle Paul said, "In him we live and move and have our being." The sustaining force that holds galaxies together is the same force that keeps your heart beating right now as you read these words. And perhaps, if we slowed down enough, we might just feel it, a quiet hum beneath the surface of things. The Creator still creating. If we pause long enough, beyond the noise of daily routines and digital distractions, there's something unmistakable we can feel moving through the fabric of reality. Call it energy, call it spirit, Call it life itself. But whatever name we choose, it speaks to something universal and deeply intimate, a creative force that both surrounds us and flows within us. Physicists describe the universe as governed by fundamental forces: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces. These invisible, yet all-powerful interactions hold galaxies together, shape atomic structures, and make the existence of matter itself possible. But what set those forces into motion? Why do the laws of physics exist at all? Some contemporary cosmologists point toward quantum fluctuations in a vacuum state, describing a universe arising from apparent nothingness. Yet even in this vacuum, there are rules, predictable behaviors, underlying laws. Where do those laws come from? This is where science and spirituality begin to shake hands, where even the most atheistic physicist sometimes gazes into the night sky and whispers, almost involuntarily, there must be something more. The Urantia Book doesn't simply propose a philosophical answer. It presents a living, dynamic God whose creative energy underlies not just the birth of the universe, but every continuing moment within it. This perspective echoes the Taoist understanding of the Tao as the spontaneous, self-generating flow of existence. The Tao is not a person, but it behaves with intention. It creates without effort. It nourishes without claiming ownership. It moves not out of need, but out of the very nature of its being. Lao Tzu captures this in one of the most quoted passages of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao does nothing, yet leaves nothing undone. Similarly, the Urantia Book describes God as both transcendent and immanent. God transcends the universe, existing beyond time and space, but is also present in every atom, in every heartbeat, in every act of love. The idea of divine immanence appears across many traditions. In Hinduism, the concept of Ishvara, God manifest in the world, mirrors this idea. In Christianity, the Holy Spirit is said to move within all creation, guiding, inspiring, sustaining. The philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, both a scientist and a Jesuit priest, spoke of the divine milieu, an understanding that God is the environment in which we live, move, and grow. For him, evolution itself was not separate from God's creative action, but a direct expression of it. When viewed this way, the story of creation isn't a single event locked in cosmic history. It's happening now, right here, in the pulse of your heart, in the stretching of trees toward the sun, in the gravitational pull that keeps Earth dancing with the moon. Even in your smallest moments of self-awareness, the sustaining presence of the first source and center is there. Some traditions describe this ongoing creation as divine Lila, the cosmic play, a dance of existence where God experiences life through countless forms, always giving, always sustaining. The Urantia Book invites us to go a step further. Not only are we sustained by God, we are invited to participate in this ongoing act of creation by choosing love over fear, by building instead of destroying, by seeking truth, living beauty, and practicing goodness. We don't live in a closed system. We live in an unfolding, living cosmos, a universe being continually shaped by both divine will and human choice. When we align our lives with this greater flow, when we let go of resistance and step into the current, something changes inside us. We stop feeling like isolated beings floating through a cold, indifferent space, and start remembering that we are part of something vast, beautiful, intentional. We are part of God's unfolding story, and the story continues with every breath, with every choice, with every small act of love that sends ripples farther than we can imagine. As we move into the next chapter, let's lean deeper into this question. If God is both the creator and the sustainer, then what does that say about how we live, how we love, and how we choose to walk through this brief, beautiful experience called life? Chapter 5, The Mystery of the Inner Presence. What if, right now, as you sit reading these words, there is something holy happening inside you, something ancient, something eternal, something far older than your name, your story, your body. Some traditions call it the soul. Others call it the spirit. The Urantia Book gives it a very specific and beautiful name, the thought adjuster. According to the Urantia teachings, every morally conscious, will-endowed human being carries within them a literal fragment of God himself. Not a symbol, not a poetic metaphor, but an actual, living spark of divine reality, dwelling in the center of your being, silently guiding, gently whispering. It's almost too big an idea to grasp. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, haven't there been moments in your life when you felt something greater moving inside you? Times when, despite fear, doubt, or confusion, you suddenly chose compassion over anger, forgiveness over resentment, hope over despair? Moments when something deep within you nudged you toward the light? Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist and pioneer of transpersonal psychology, spoke of what he called the self, the central organizing force of the psyche, the true center beyond the ego. For Jung, this self was not just a psychological construct. It was the seat of meaning, a connection point between the individual and the transcendent. He famously wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." In many ways, the Urantia concept of the thought adjuster feels like the next step in this psychological spiritual evolution. It's not just about integrating shadow and persona. It's about awakening to the literal presence of God inside you. Hindu philosophy touches on something similar. In the Upanishads, the Atman is described as the eternal self, the divine essence within each person that is one with Brahman, the ultimate reality. That art thou, the sages say, meaning you are already connected to the infinite. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to seek it outside yourself. You simply have to awaken to it. The Jewish mystical tradition, the Kabbalah, speaks of the spark of the divine residing within each soul, a fragment of sacred light placed inside us before birth, hidden beneath layers of human experience, waiting to be rediscovered. Christianity offers yet another perspective. The concept of imago Dei, the image of God, declares that each human being reflects something of God's nature. St. Paul, writing to the early Christians, reminded them, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you?" Different languages, different metaphors, but a shared intuition. We carry something eternal within the finite vessel of this human life. But here's where the Urantia Book adds something uniquely personal. The thought adjuster isn't just a passive presence. It's an active partner in your spiritual growth, a guide, a counselor, a divine inner teacher, ever present, ever patient. It works tirelessly, day after day, moment after moment, helping to reshape our thoughts, refine our motives, and elevate our desires. Sometimes its guidance feels like intuition, sometimes like conscience, other times like a sudden, unexplainable clarity during a moral crossroads. And even in our worst moments, when we act selfishly, when we ignore the inner nudge toward goodness, the adjuster waits and waits and waits with infinite patience and infinite love. Because this fragment of God isn't here to condemn you. It's here to awaken you, to help you become the person you were born to be. If the thought adjuster is indeed a fragment of God living within us, then it raises a profound question. Why don't we hear it more clearly? Why does the divine voice inside us often feel so distant, so faint, as if trapped beneath layers of noise, fear, and distraction? Carl Jung spoke of the layers of the psyche, the many masks we wear, the persona, the shadow, the ego, all of them necessary in some ways, but also all of them prone to drowning out the quiet voice of the self. It's not that God is silent. It's that our inner world has become too loud. Our fears scream. Our doubts shout. Our wounds echo through our thoughts like old, untended alarms. But underneath it all, the adjuster waits, whispering not in volume, but in stillness. This is why across spiritual traditions, the practice of inner silence, meditation, and contemplation appears again and again. The Buddhist seeks sati, mindfulness, to still the mind. Christian mystics like Thomas Merton retreat into contemplative prayer to clear space for divine encounter. In Hinduism, meditation on the Atman draws the practitioner closer to that inner divine core. The Urantia Book echoes this universal spiritual truth, that the thought adjuster speaks clearest when the mind grows still, when the heart softens, and when we cultivate moments of sacred listening. But still, the adjuster's work doesn't depend on our awareness alone. Even in our unawareness, even when we're lost in ego-driven pursuits, the adjuster continues its labor. It nudges our thoughts toward higher ideals. It plants seeds of compassion where anger once bloomed. It reframes our suffering into invitations for growth. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming whole, toward integrating the fragmented parts of ourselves into a harmonious self. The Urantia Book would say, this journey is not merely psychological. It's spiritual evolution, guided at every step by a living fragment of the divine. Over time, with each choice toward love, with each surrender of fear, with every small moment of courage and forgiveness, we become more attuned. We start to hear the adjuster's voice in moments we used to overlook, in the pause before we speak a harsh word, in the sudden compassion for someone we once judged, in the aching beauty of sunset that stirs something too deep for words, and the most extraordinary promise of the Urantia teachings, that this partnership with the adjuster, if nurtured, will one day lead us to fusion, a permanent, eternal union with this divine fragment. A moment when the mortal and the divine become one. Not symbolically, but literally. The soul, through countless choices of truth, beauty, and goodness, grows to the point where it can merge forever with the fragment of God within it. No longer two, but one. The implications of this are staggering. It means every decision you make today, every act of love, every struggle to choose the higher path is part of a cosmic process leading you towards something beyond mortality, beyond time. It means that right now, even as you sit wherever you are reading these words, you are not alone in your inner life. You have a companion, a guide, a spark of the eternal. And whether you feel it clearly or only faintly, the thought adjuster waits, loves, guides, patient as the stars, persistent as love itself. As we continue this journey together, the next question becomes, if this divine presence is real, how can we better align our lives with it? How can we begin to listen, really listen, to the voice within? Let's explore that together. And if this chapter has stirred something inside you, help us continue sharing this light. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Every day, we offer new reflections to nourish your soul's journey. Chapter 6, The Invitation. Be perfect. There are words that, when first heard, seem almost impossible to grasp. They land in the heart with both awe and fear. Be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect. These words, attributed to Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, have echoed across centuries, stirring both inspiration and anxiety in those who hear them. How could we, flawed and fragile as we are, even begin to approach perfection? Isn't perfection something reserved for gods, for angels, for the unattainable? And yet, the invitation stands, not as a threat, not as a demand from a distant cosmic judge, but as a calling, a gentle, persistent invitation to grow, to evolve, to become. The Urantia Book takes this ancient command and reframes it in cosmic language. Be you perfect, even as I am perfect. It describes this not as an impossible task, but as the central purpose of human existence. An evolutionary journey of the soul, where each step, each choice toward love, truth, beauty, and goodness brings us closer to the divine. But what does perfection really mean? For many, the word triggers images of moral flawlessness, a life without mistakes, without anger, without doubt. But that's not the kind of perfection the great spiritual teachers were talking about. There is moral perfection, yes, the daily effort to live with integrity, kindness, and justice. But there is also spiritual perfection, the gradual alignment of our inner being with the values and presence of God. And then there is existential perfection, a far-off, eternal goal, the ultimate unification with the divine source from which we came. In Buddhism, the path towards spiritual maturity is often described not as a quest for unreachable moral purity, but as a middle way, a balanced path between extremes. The Buddha, after years of both indulgence and extreme asceticism, discovered that enlightenment wasn't found in rigid self-denial, nor in reckless pleasure-seeking. It was found in balance, in mindfulness, in compassion, in waking up to the reality of suffering and responding to it with love and wisdom. This middle way is, in many ways, another expression of the same universal invitation. Grow, mature, align with something higher. In the Christian tradition, the call to be holy as God is holy reflects a similar heart. Holiness here isn't about superficial moralism. It's about setting oneself apart, not in arrogance, but in intention and love. It's about choosing light over shadow, healing over harm, forgiveness over bitterness. Thomas Merton, the American Trappist monk and mystic, once wrote, "For me to be a saint means to be myself," meaning true holiness isn't about becoming something artificial or unattainable. It's about peeling away everything false and uncovering the divine image already planted inside us. The Urantia perspective echoes this. It describes the soul's journey not as a test we are doomed to fail, but as a process we are designed to grow into. Yes, we will stumble. Yes, we will fall short. But every step matters. Every moment of honesty, every choice toward love, every act of courage to stand for truth moves us forward on this path toward divine resemblance. And this journey is not about comparison with others. It's about alignment with the best version of who we are capable of becoming. Perfection, in this context, isn't about being flawless. It's about being faithful to the inner pull, toward growth, toward love, toward God. Perfection, Such a loaded word. In a culture obsessed with flawless appearances, curated social feeds, and polished performances, the idea of perfection often feels like a toxic pressure, a relentless voice saying, "You're not enough, try harder, do more." But the perfection spoken of in the words of Jesus, and later echoed in the Urantia Book, is of a different kind altogether. It's not about spotless behavior. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about something deeper, something truer, something more human and more divine at the same time. It's about growth, becoming, aligning. In Buddhist philosophy, the middle way teaches us that extremes, whether of indulgence or of self-denial, lead us away from inner peace. Perfection, then, is not a rigid state of being, but a dynamic process of balance. The Dalai Lama often speaks of progress over perfection, reminding practitioners that spiritual growth is incremental. The goal isn't to become some unreachable ideal, but to become more compassionate, more awake, more present with each passing day. The Urantia Book deepens this by emphasizing that perfection is a trajectory, not a destination. An eternal ascent with infinite room for learning, experiencing, evolving. It describes human beings as ascending mortals, emphasizing that our imperfections are not reasons for shame, but invitations to grow. Even in Christian theology, there's a shift when we move beyond surface interpretations. When Peter writes, "Be holy because I am holy," it's not a demand for legalistic purity. It's a relational invitation. Come closer. Reflect me. Let your life become a mirror of love. Holiness, in its truest form, is about presence, about intention, about walking through the world with open eyes and an open heart. And perhaps most importantly, it's about transformation from the inside out. Carl Jung, while working in the field of psychology, arrived at a conclusion that sounds remarkably spiritual. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. To Jung, this process of individuation, becoming whole, was not unlike the spiritual journeys described in religious traditions. For Jung, the goal wasn't to erase flaws, but to integrate the light and shadow within us, to become conscious, authentic, and awake. In that sense, the path toward perfection is not about pretending to be something you're not. It's about embracing who you are and allowing that self to evolve. One step closer to love, one step closer to truth, one step closer to God. This perfection is relational. It's not measured against a cosmic checklist. It's measured by the depth of your connection to the divine source and to others. It's felt in the forgiveness you offer when it's hard, in the love you choose when fear feels easier, in the truth you speak when silence would be safer. And the most beautiful part, according to the Urantia teachings, God knows where you are in this journey and loves you in it. You're not being asked to leap from brokenness to perfection overnight. You're being invited to grow today in this breath, in this choice. To say yes, to love, to progress, because the perfection God calls you to isn't the absence of failure. It's the presence of faithfulness. So as we continue on this journey together, let this invitation settle into your heart. You're not expected to arrive. You're simply invited to walk, one conscious, loving step at a time. Chapter 7. The Spiritual Journey of Humanity. There's a moment in every life, a quiet turning point, when the questions shift. We move from, what can I get from life? To, what is life asking for me? For some, this shift happens gradually. For others, it arrives like a lightning bolt, after loss, heartbreak, failure, or unexpected beauty. But no matter how it comes, the awakening begins. The Urantia Book describes the human experience as a spiritual ascent, from ignorance to understanding, from fear to faith, from confusion to clarity. We begin our lives in a kind of spiritual sleepwalking, guided mostly by instinct, chasing comfort, avoiding pain, building identities based on what others expect from us. This is not failure. It's the starting point. Abraham Maslow, one of the great figures in humanistic psychology, described this process in his now famous hierarchy of needs, a pyramid-shaped model representing human motivation. At the base are physiological needs: food, water, shelter. Above that, safety, love and belonging, esteem. And at the very top, self-actualization, the realization of one's fullest potential. Maslow believed that until basic needs are met, higher spiritual and existential questions rarely emerge. But once those needs are stable, once the body feels secure and the ego somewhat affirmed, something stirs. We begin to hunger for something deeper: meaning, purpose, connection with something larger than ourselves. The Urantia Book expands this idea into cosmic proportions. It suggests that the journey towards self-actualization is not the final step, but a gateway into a far greater process: soul actualization and, ultimately, God actualization. In other words, the psychological work of becoming whole is the soil in which the spiritual seed takes root. Carl Rogers, another pioneer of humanistic psychology, spoke of the fully functioning person, someone who is open to experience, living authentically and guided by an internal locus of evaluation rather than external approval. The Urantia teachings would nod in agreement, then add, yes, and beyond that, the person who begins to align their will with the will of God. This is the next step in human evolution, not just biological or intellectual, but spiritual evolution. It's a process, a journey from spiritual childhood to spiritual adulthood. And like all growth, it's messy, unpredictable, full of missteps and course corrections. There are days when you'll feel close to God, and days when the silence feels unbearable. There are seasons of clarity and seasons of wandering, but always moving forward, step by step, choice by choice. And here's the grace of it all: the thought adjuster within you, that divine fragment placed by God Himself, walks this path with you, gently nudging, patiently guiding, even when you feel most lost. As we continue exploring this journey, the next step is to understand how this spiritual growth doesn't just happen inside us, but begins to shape how we live in the world. Growth never happens in straight lines, and spiritual growth, perhaps least of all. One day, you feel full of purpose, connected, almost luminous inside. The next, you wonder if you've taken 10 steps backward. But this is how it works. Evolution, whether biological, emotional, or spiritual, is messy, non-linear, and full of detours. Maslow himself acknowledged that self-actualization isn't a permanent state, but a series of moments. Peak experiences, he called them, brief flashes of transcendence when, for just a moment, everything feels connected, unified. Right. You might experience this standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, or holding your newborn child for the first time, or during a moment of deep prayer when the presence of something greater feels almost tangible. The Urantia Book speaks of these moments as early glimpses of higher consciousness, a preview of the journey still to come. But after the peak, we return to the valley, to dishes in the sink, to deadlines, to arguments, to doubt. And that's okay, because spiritual maturity isn't built during the peak moments. It's built in the valleys, in the quiet decision to keep walking, to keep choosing love, even when the emotional high has faded. Carl Rogers believed that the hallmark of a fully functioning person was the capacity for openness to experience, to embrace life as it comes, rather than retreating into fear or denial. In spiritual terms, this means learning to meet God in every part of our experience, not just in joy, but also in grief, not just in clarity, but also in confusion. The Urantia Book encourages us to see this life not as a test to be passed, but as a training ground for the soul, a place where we learn, fail, rise again, and grow stronger in faith and character. Each stage of growth comes with its own challenges. At first, we seek external validation, wanting approval, fearing rejection. Then we start developing internal moral awareness, recognizing right from wrong, feeling the weight of choice. Later still, we begin yearning for higher meaning, moving from survival mode to service, from personal fulfillment to cosmic significance. This process parallels Maslow's progression from basic needs towards self-transcendence, a level he added later in his career, but that few psychology textbooks mention. Self-transcendence is when the human being begins to move beyond personal fulfillment and toward union with something greater, whether that's humanity, truth, beauty, or God. It's no coincidence that this echoes what the Urantia Book describes as the supreme adventure of existence, the journey toward knowing God and becoming like Him, not because God demands it, but because love invites it. The journey from spiritual ignorance to awakening is not about achieving perfection in a lifetime. It's about responding to the call over and over in small, human, imperfect ways. It's choosing to forgive when holding a grudge would be easier. It's offering kindness when annoyance feels justified. It's believing in hope when despair seems more logical. And perhaps most importantly, it's remembering that no step is wasted. Every prayer whispered, every tear shed, every act of love becomes part of the fabric of your soul, part of your unfolding story, part of your eternal journey. Because in the end, spiritual growth isn't about climbing toward heaven. It's about allowing heaven to grow inside you. Chapter 8, God, Person or Energy. For centuries, one question has quietly followed humanity like a shadow. Is God a person we can know, or simply an energy we can feel? It's a question that touches everything. How we pray, how we think about life and death, how we make moral choices, and even how we feel when we stand alone beneath the night sky. On one end of the spectrum, we find pantheism, the belief that God is not a personal being, but the sum total of the universe itself. In this view, God is the wind in the trees, the sun on your face, the rhythm of the oceans, the pulse of the stars. Everything and nothing in particular. It's a comforting idea for many. It removes the fear of divine judgment. It turns God into a cosmic presence, everywhere and nowhere at once. Alan Watts, with his playful yet razor-sharp critique of Western religious imagery, often poked fun at the outdated picture of God as an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne somewhere above the clouds. For Watts, such an image was both limiting and, frankly, absurd. He urged people to move beyond anthropomorphic ideas of God, those human-shaped projections that belong more to medieval art than to mature spirituality. But here's the danger with the pendulum swinging too far the other way. When God becomes only energy, only vibration, only the universe, we lose something precious, the possibility of relationship. You can't pray to an energy field. You can't have a conversation with a law of physics. You can't feel seen, known, or loved by an impersonal cosmic force. And here is where the Urantia Book offers something both radical and beautifully balanced. It fully affirms that God is the first source and center, the original energy, the creator of time and space, the force behind all existence. But it also insists, without apology, that God is a person, not a person in the limited human sense of ego and form, but personality in its most exalted, cosmic, infinite expression, a personality capable of intention, of choice, of love, of relationship, a God who creates and cares, a God who designs galaxies and hears your whispered fears at 3 a.m. This perspective doesn't diminish the grandeur of the universe. It doesn't shrink God down to human size. Instead, it expands our idea of personhood itself. God's personality isn't a projection of ours. Ours is a reflection of His. The Jewish tradition captures a glimpse of this with the concept of being created in the image of God, the Imago Dei. Christian theology speaks of God as both transcendent and immanent, high above and deeply near. The mystics from Sufi poets like Rumi to Christian contemplatives like Julian of Norwich have always understood this paradox, that God is both the ground of being and also a lover who calls to us by name. Perhaps the most beautiful thing about this Urantia concept is that it doesn't ask you to choose between God as energy and God as person. It suggests that both are true, that God is the energy behind every atom and the heart behind every prayer, that God holds galaxies in His will and still notices the tears you cry when no one else is watching. The journey now is learning how to live in relationship with a being so vast. It's so intimately close. It's tempting to choose sides. Some cling to the safety of tradition, visualizing God in almost human form, a father figure with emotions, plans, and even moments of divine frustration. Others, disillusioned by such limited depictions, drift toward pure abstraction, where God dissolves into cosmic law, universal vibration, or sheer potentiality. But what if both sides are only holding part of the truth? Alan Watts often challenged Western audiences to question their inherited images of God. In one lecture, he said, "If you insist on having a personal God, you'll likely create Him in your own image, with all your fears, your moral hang-ups, and your cultural biases. What's pushed people towards seeing God as process, energy, flow?" And he wasn't wrong. But perhaps what Watts, like many mystics, was reaching for, without explicitly naming, was what the Urantia Book describes in full detail. A God who is both infinite and intimate, both source and soul, both universal law and loving parent. The Urantia revelation carefully dismantles the childish caricatures of God, the old man in the sky trope that Watts loved to critique, while preserving something that many modern spiritual movements risk losing entirely: the possibility of personal relationship with the divine. God, according to Urantia, is not limited by form, but is still personality in its highest and purest sense. Personality, in this context, doesn't mean a face or a body. It means intentionality, will, purpose, relational capacity, and above all, love. To reduce God to mere energy is to miss this essential truth. Energy cannot choose to love you. A cosmic law cannot listen to your prayers. An impersonal field cannot rejoice in your small, daily acts of courage. But a divine person can, and does. The philosopher Martin Buber wrote about the difference between I-it and I-thou relationships. In an I-it relationship, we treat the world as an object, something to analyze, control, or categorize. But in an I-thou relationship, we meet the other, whether human or divine, as a subject, as a presence, as someone with whom we can engage in dialogue. To see God as pure energy leaves us stuck in an I-it universe. But when we dare to believe that God is personal, without being limited by human personality, we open ourselves to something deeper, something transformative. Rumi, the great Sufi poet, captures this tension beautifully. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. In other words, God is the ocean, but still notices the drop, and you are both. The Urantia Book reminds us that while God is the first source and center, sustaining all energy, all matter, all spirit, God is also the Universal Father, the one who knows you, the one who partners with you through the thought adjuster within, the one who invites you into eternal relationship. This is not about choosing between theology and mysticism or between science and faith. It's about embracing the paradox that the God who holds galaxies in balance is the same God who walks with you unseen but deeply felt in every step of your journey. And perhaps that's the real invitation of this chapter, not to solve the mystery, but to step deeper into it, to live as though you are known, because you are, to pray as though someone listens, because someone does, and to love, because love is the very language of the divine. Chapter 9, God as a loving Father. For many, the word Father evokes complicated feelings. For some, it brings memories of safety, warmth, and protection. For others, distance, disappointment, or even pain. So when we speak of God as Father, we're not just talking theology. We're stepping into the deepest emotional architecture of what it means to feel cared for or abandoned, known or unseen. The Urantia Book boldly and tenderly presents God first and foremost as the Universal Father, not just creator, not just force, not just supreme architect of the cosmos, but Father in the most perfect, unconditional, and loving sense of the word. This isn't the flawed human fatherhood that many have experienced. This is paternity without wounds, guidance without control, love without condition. The idea of God as Father isn't unique to Urantia. In Christianity, Jesus frequently referred to God as Abba, a term that scholars remind us was less formal and more intimate, closer to Dad or Papa than the cold title Father. It was a revolutionary idea in his time. To call God Abba shattered the distance between humanity and the divine. In Islamic tradition, while God, Allah, is not referred to as Father, the divine names include Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, the most compassionate, the most merciful, attributes that mirror parental love and care. But here's the delicate truth modern psychology helps us understand. Our earliest experiences with caregivers deeply shape the way we imagine God. Attachment theory, first developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, reveals that how we bonded with our parents, or primary caregivers, affects how we bond with others, and even with God. Those who grew up with secure attachments often find it easier to believe in a loving, responsive God. Those who experience neglect, inconsistency, or abuse may struggle with feelings of abandonment or anger toward the divine. Psychologists call this God image. It's the unconscious template we carry, often without realizing it, about how God feels about us. Is God near or distant? Kind or punitive? Safe or dangerous? For some, reshaping this God image becomes one of the most important steps in their spiritual healing. The Urantia Book's portrayal of God as the loving Father offers a powerful corrective to distorted images. It describes a God who never withdraws, never punishes out of anger, never stops loving, even when we turn away, even when we fall, even when we forget. The Father waits, watches, and continues loving without pause. Theologian Henri Nouwen captured this beautifully in The Return of the Prodigal Son. reflecting on Jesus' parable. The heart of the Father burns with an infinite desire to bring his children home. And that's the heart of this chapter. To rediscover, or maybe discover for the first time, that God is not watching us with suspicion, but waiting for us with open arms. Understanding God as a loving Father doesn't mean pretending that life is always easy. It doesn't erase suffering or eliminate doubt, but it does change how we move through both. The Urantia Book teaches that God's love is constant, proactive, and deeply personal. It suggests that God is not only aware of us collectively as humanity, but individually, uniquely, intimately. You're not a face in the crowd. You're known. You're wanted. You are loved exactly as you are, and too much to be left where you are. This kind of divine love is not performance-based. You don't earn it by being morally perfect. You don't lose it by failing. Psychologists studying attachment repair often speak of the healing power that comes from earned secure attachment. In simple terms, even if your early relationships were fractured, you can later in life develop new, healthier patterns of trust and connection, both with people and with God. Spiritual teachers across traditions have echoed this truth. Henri Nouwen, in his deeply personal writings, describes his journey from insecurity and self-rejection toward a resting place in divine love. The voice of despair says, "I am nothing, nobody cares. I am alone." The voice of God says, "You are my beloved, on you my favor rests." When you begin to internalize that, when you start waking up each day not asking, "Am I worthy?" but saying, "I am loved," something shifts. You begin living not for love, but from love. The Urantia Book describes this shift as moving from fear-based religion to faith-based living. Not serving God out of obligation, but walking with God out of desire and trust. This changes how we pray. Our prayers become less like desperate pleas to a distant monarch, and more like conversations with a loving parent. This changes how we handle failure. Instead of spiraling into shame, we return, again and again, to the arms of grace. This even changes how we view others. Because if we're all children of the same divine parent, then love, compassion, and forgiveness aren't just noble ideals. They become the most natural response. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." Perhaps that's true of our distorted images of God, too. We don't always solve our theology. We grow beyond it, into something wider, softer, truer. So if you've carried an image of God as distant, cold, or punitive, know this. The journey back to the heart of the Father is open, always waiting. You don't need perfect faith to take the next step, just enough courage to believe that love is still reaching for you. Even now, Chapter 10, Faith, Reason, and Personal Experience. For many of us raised in religious traditions, faith often began as something inherited, passed down like a family recipe, memorized, recited, but rarely questioned. We believed because we were told to believe. We prayed because we were told to pray. We accepted doctrines because doubting them felt dangerous. But at some point, whether in adolescence or adulthood, most of us reach a crossroads. Is belief enough? And deeper still, can faith survive without personal experience? The Urantia Book makes a powerful and refreshing statement. True religion does not depend on fear, tradition, or external authority. It is based on personal spiritual experience. This is the dividing line between living faith and religious dogma. Dogma says, believe this because we say so. Faith says, step into the unknown and discover for yourself. Mystics across centuries have known this truth. Meister Eckhart, the 13th century Christian mystic, once wrote, "God is at home. It is we who have gone out for a walk." Meaning, the divine presence is always near. It is our awareness that drifts. Saint Teresa of Avila, one of the great contemplatives of Christian history, described prayer not as reciting words, but as an intimate sharing between friends. Her writings invite us to move beyond formality, beyond rigid dogma, into authentic inner encounter. But how does this translate into daily life for modern seekers like us? How do we begin to experience God, not just read about God? It starts with slowing down. In a world addicted to speed and stimulation, spiritual perception requires stillness. Mindfulness practices, popularized today through apps and secular meditation programs, have their roots in ancient spiritual traditions. But even beyond technique, the essential invitation remains. Be present, be available, listen. Christian mystics called this contemplation, a word that implies both focus and surrender, a quiet letting go and a simple returning, again and again, to the moment, to the breath, to the awareness of divine presence. The Urantia Book speaks of worshipful meditation, encouraging us not just to ask God for things, but to pause, to feel, to open ourselves to communion without words. And here's the paradox. This kind of spiritual experience often bypasses reason. It doesn't ignore reason. It simply transcends it. Faith is not the enemy of reason. It's the next step beyond it. Reason builds the ladder. Faith dares to climb. St. Augustine captured this beautifully when he said, "Faith is to believe what you do not see. The reward of this faith is to see what you believe." In our modern context, where skepticism and intellectual critique are often seen as higher virtues than trust or surrender, this can feel countercultural. But time and again, we return to this truth. God is not an academic theory to be analyzed. God is a living presence to be experienced. And that experience often begins in the quietest moments of your day, in the stillness before sleep, in the pause between breaths, in the silent ache that calls you towards something more. The journey from belief to experience is not about abandoning reason. It's about moving through it and beyond it. Reason helps us build the framework. It asks the hard questions. It dismantles the false. It sharpens discernment. But once the scaffolding is built, faith invites us to step into the space that reason cannot fill. Saint John of the Cross, another mystic from the Spanish tradition, spoke of the dark night of the soul, a season when familiar beliefs crumble, when emotional consolation disappears, and when God seems absent. But underneath it all, something sacred is happening. The transformation of faith from concept to encounter. It's in these moments, when doctrine no longer comforts and formulas no longer work, that we discover the truth Meister Eckhart hinted at. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. In other words, there is a point inside you where the divine and your deepest self are already meeting. So how do we cultivate this space in everyday life? It starts small. 5 minutes of silence before the day begins. Turning off distractions to sit and listen. Walking in nature without headphones, allowing the trees, the wind, the earth to speak to the quiet places in you. For some, it's breath-focused meditation. For others, Lectio Divina, an ancient Christian practice of slowly, prayerfully reading sacred texts. For others still, it's simply sitting in a dark room, whispering one honest prayer. Here I am, speak if you will. The Urantia Book encourages us toward this kind of daily, living connection. It speaks of the thought adjuster's constant presence, quietly guiding us, whether we feel it or not. But it also warns. Religious dogma without personal spiritual experience can lead to spiritual stagnation. Believing the right things without opening the heart. Memorizing creeds without nurturing relationship. It's like reading a recipe but never tasting the meal. Real spiritual growth happens when faith becomes lived experience. When the words on the page become the language of your own heart. When we stop asking, "What do I believe?" and start asking, "What have I experienced of God's love today?" Teresa of Avila once described her spiritual awakening as moving from speaking about God to speaking with God. That's the invitation for each of us. Not to discard reason, not to abandon theology, but to let all of it, every teaching, every doubt, every longing, lead us to the one place that truly matters, the living experience of God within us. As Meister Eckhart said, "What good is it to me if Mary gave birth to the Son of God 1400 years ago, and I do not also give birth to him in my time and in my culture?" The spiritual path was never meant to stop at belief. It was always meant to lead to transformation. And transformation begins the moment we say yes to encounter. And if this reflection stirred something in you, help us spread this message further. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Every day, we bring new, soul-nourishing reflections for your journey. Chapter 11, The Role of Free Will. If there's one truth the universe seems to whisper again and again, it's this. You are free. Free to choose. Free to respond. Free to turn toward God or away. The Urantia Book emphasizes this in almost every chapter that speaks of a human soul. That God never forces, never manipulates, never coerces. The divine call is an invitation, not a command. And at the heart of that invitation lies free will. Existentialist philosophers spent much of the 20th century wrestling with the weight of human freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, "Man is condemned to be free." A harsh phrase, but behind it, a powerful truth. We cannot escape responsibility for our choices. Even choosing not to choose is a choice. For Sartre, this freedom was often a source of anxiety. The burden of defining one's own meaning in a world that offers no predetermined blueprint. But for Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher often called the father of existentialism, freedom was something even deeper. A leap of faith. Kierkegaard believed that true spiritual awakening begins when we realize we are not merely free to choose. We're called to choose between despair and hope, between stagnation and growth, between a life centered on the self and a life open to God. The Urantia Book builds on this existential tension. It teaches that our choices, especially our moral and spiritual decisions, carry eternal significance. Each decision to choose love over fear, forgiveness over resentment, truth over convenience, shapes the very fabric of our soul. And God, in infinite love, allows us this freedom, even knowing we may misuse it. Why? Because coerced love is not love at all. Because growth without choice is not growth, it's programming. This echoes something deeply resonant across all authentic spiritual traditions. That God wants relationship, not robots. St. Augustine once said, "God who created you without you will not save you without you." Meaning, the divine will never override your human will. And this is where the journey of faith becomes profoundly personal. Every day, we stand at 100 small crossroads. Will I choose patience or anger? Will I reach out or withdraw? Will I follow the quiet nudge toward growth or retreat into comfort? This is what makes the human experience both beautiful and terrifying. that we are eternally free and eternally responsible. But here's the hope buried in this existential freedom, that every small, sincere choice toward love and truth is met with grace, that with each decision, we're not just shaping our character, we're shaping our soul's destiny. So here we stand, each of us on the edge of choice, every single day. And while philosophers like Sartre framed this freedom in existential angst, the Urantia Book invites us to see it through a different lens, as sacred opportunity. You're not just free, you're free because God trusts you, because God believes in your potential for growth, for goodness, for love. The universe doesn't force your hand. It whispers, it invites, it waits. Kierkegaard called this tension the dizziness of freedom. That overwhelming moment when you realize that nothing external will make the choice for you. Will you live by habit or by intention? Will you say yes to spiritual growth or stay where it feels safer, more familiar, but smaller? The Urantia Book speaks of this as the gradual awakening of moral consciousness. It reminds us that every moral decision, no matter how small, contributes to the evolution of the soul. And here's something beautiful and often overlooked. Even hesitation, even failure, can become part of the growth process. Because every stumble teaches, every wrong turn can deepen wisdom. Every no can prepare the soil for a future yes. God doesn't sit distant, tallying up your mistakes. The divine presence, through the thought adjuster, gently nudges, again and again, toward better choices, toward deeper love, toward awakening. Carl Jung once wrote, "I'm not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And that is the heart of spiritual evolution. Freedom is the classroom. Choice is the lesson plan. And love is both the teacher and the goal. So what does this mean for you today in real life? It means that the next time you feel the inner pull to forgive, to reach out, to pause and listen before reacting, that's not just psychology at work. That's not just social conditioning. That's the divine meeting you at the intersection of choice and grace. You are being invited again and again into growth. Not perfection, not flawless moral execution, but real, lived transformation, one choice at a time. As the Urantia Book reminds us, the choosing and decision-making experience of the human soul is the very arena where destiny is shaped. And this isn't just cosmic poetry. It's personal. It's now. It's yours. So today, ask yourself, in this moment, with this decision, am I choosing fear or love? Am I moving toward light or hiding in shadow? And know this, every sincere choice for truth and goodness moves you closer to the divine, closer to the person you were always meant to become. Chapter 12, Transcending the Rational Mind, the Leap of Faith. There's a point in every seeker's journey where reason simply runs out of road, where logic, no matter how carefully constructed, stops delivering answers, where philosophical arguments feel thin, where scientific explanations seem incomplete. This isn't a failure of intelligence. It's simply a recognition of what reason can and cannot do. The Urantia Book speaks of this with clarity. While reason and logic are gifts, essential tools for navigating reality, they're not enough when it comes to fully grasping the infinite. Why? Because we're finite. Because our human minds are wired to process patterns, causality, data points, not eternity, not unconditional love, not the mind of God. Even Albert Einstein, whose life was built on the foundations of reason and mathematics, admitted, the most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of true art and true science. In other words, Even science begins where certainty ends. This is where faith begins to matter. But let's pause for a moment and redefine faith, not as blind belief, not as intellectual surrender, but as an active, courageous leap into deeper knowing. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher and theologian, called this moment the leap of faith. He argued that there comes a point where reason can only take you so far, where the soul must leap, not because there's empirical proof waiting on the other side, but because something inside you knows. There's someone beyond the veil. Kierkegaard described it as standing at the edge of a cliff, looking into darkness with no visible bridge in sight, yet stepping forward anyway, because staying still would be a worse death. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but it's real. And it's in that space, where certainty collapses and trust begins, that most spiritual awakenings happen. The Urantia teachings describe this beautifully. That faith is the supreme assertion of the human personality, a decision to trust in unseen realities, not out of ignorance, but out of spiritual courage. This isn't about rejecting science, nor is it about discarding reason. It's about placing both in their proper place. Reason builds the foundation. Science teaches us how the universe works. But faith teaches us why we exist at all. And perhaps most importantly, faith invites us into relationship. Because God doesn't ask us to solve them like a math problem. God invites us to trust Him like a friend. This is the leap, not into irrationality, but into relationship, into mystery, into love, into the unseen arms that, paradoxically, hold us every day, even now. The tension between faith and proof has haunted seekers, philosophers, and scientists for generations. We want to believe, but we also want evidence. We crave meaning, but we demand data. The modern mind often equates truth with what can be measured, observed, or repeated under control conditions. But here's the catch. Love cannot be put in a test tube. Hope cannot be graphed. Meaning cannot be reduced to molecular formulas. And God, the infinite source of all that is, will never submit to a laboratory experiment. This isn't a limitation on God's part. It's a limitation of the tools we're using to look. Science can describe how the brain lights up during prayer. It can map neural pathways of meditation and compassion. It can even identify hormones released during moments of awe and transcendence. But what science cannot do is explain why that moment of awe brought tears to your eyes. Why hearing a particular song at a particular moment cracked open your heart. Why, in the face of impossible odds, you still chose hope. The Urantia Book makes this point clear. God reveals Himself not through physical evidence, but through inner experience. Through that quiet certainty you feel, that sense of being held, that whisper in your soul that says, "Keep going, I am here." Kierkegaard called faith a passion, not cold acceptance, but a burning decision to trust in what cannot yet be seen. It's the same kind of trust you practice every time you step onto an airplane. Not knowing the pilot, not having inspected the engines, but believing you'll reach your destination. But when it comes to God, the leap is even more intimate. It's trusting not just in outcomes, but in relationship. It's saying, I may not see the whole map, but I trust the one holding the compass. Mystics like Teresa of Avila and Meister Eckhart describe this inner trust as a knowing beyond knowing, a space where the soul becomes aware of God's presence, not through logic, but through direct encounter. And here's the beautiful irony. The more we lean into faith, the more we start to experience confirmations, not in the form of scientific proof, but in transformed perception. We begin to see with new eyes. Ordinary moments become sacred. Random conversations turn into messages. Coincidences feel like divine choreography. The Urantia Book describes this as spiritual insight, a capacity that grows not through debate, but through sincere living and trust. Faith doesn't mean rejecting reason. It means using reason to climb as high as it can, and then having the courage to leap where reason cannot follow. It's the bridge between the mind and the heart, between certainty and mystery, between human limitation and divine love. So if you find yourself hesitating, wrestling with doubt, waiting for 100% certainty before taking the next step toward God, know this: the leap of faith was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be transformational. And on the other side of that leap is not emptiness, but presence, waiting for you. Chapter 13, Cosmic Consciousness and Transpersonal Psychology. There's a threshold in human experience where words begin to break down, where language becomes too small, and where the boundaries of self, those invisible walls we spend our whole lives reinforcing, begin to dissolve. Psychologists call this realm altered states of consciousness. Spiritual traditions call it mystical union, cosmic awareness, or the direct experience of the divine. The Urantia Book points to this too, describing moments where the human mind opens itself to higher spiritual influences, glimpses of cosmic reality far beyond ordinary perception. For many in the modern West, this journey into expanded consciousness first became a topic of serious academic study thanks to pioneers like Carl Jung, Abraham Maslow, and Stanislav Grof. Carl Jung, with his groundbreaking work on the collective unconscious, proposed that beneath our personal memories, there's a shared, universal layer of human psyche, a deep reservoir filled with archetypes, symbols, and spiritual patterns that every culture across all of history seems to tap into. Jung spoke of the God image buried within each of us, not imposed by external religion, but rising naturally from the depths of the human soul. This God image, according to Jung, is part of what makes us yearn for transcendence, for meaning, for connection to something larger. Abraham Maslow, known for his hierarchy of needs, also explored this terrain. In the later years of his life, Maslow became fascinated with what he called peak experiences, those sudden, overwhelming moments where individuals feel a profound sense of unity with the universe, where time slows, where the boundaries between self and other dissolve, and where love, beauty, and truth feel unmistakably real. For Maslow, these moments weren't limited to monks or mystics. They happened to everyday people, in nature, during childbirth, while listening to music, or simply staring at a sunset. Stanislav Grof took this inquiry even further. Through his work with holotropic breathwork and early psychedelic research, Grof documented thousands of cases where individuals in expanded states reported encounters with archetypal figures, cosmic landscapes, and even direct experiences of what they described as the divine. What's fascinating is how often these reports, from people of different backgrounds, cultures, and belief systems, begin to echo similar themes. A profound sense of unity, a feeling of being loved beyond comprehension, a perception of participating in a living, intelligent universe. The Urantia Book offers a framework that harmonizes these observations. It suggests that what we interpret as cosmic consciousness or peak spiritual experience are in fact glimpses of higher levels of spiritual reality breaking through into human awareness. These aren't hallucinations. They're moments of clarity, windows opening, even if just briefly, onto the larger landscape of existence. Jung once said, Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. These expanded states are not escapes from reality. They are awakenings to a greater reality. A reality where God is not distant, but present, here, now, within. And perhaps that presence has been whispering to us all along, waiting for us to listen. One of the most fascinating patterns emerging from transpersonal psychology is how different cultures, separated by geography and time, describe remarkably similar spiritual experiences. Whether it's a Christian mystic in 14th century Europe, a Sufi poet in Persia, or a participant in a modern holotropic breathwork session, the core elements appear again and again. Feelings of unity, a sense of dissolving boundaries, encounters with archetypal beings or symbols, and above all, a direct, unmistakable awareness of something divine. Carl Jung would call this the activation of archetypal structures within the collective unconscious. Groff might describe it as a movement through non-ordinary states of consciousness, accessing transpersonal dimensions beyond the ego. The Urantia Book frames this as contact with the spiritual circuits of the universe, moments where the soul momentarily tunes into a higher frequency, becoming more aware of the spiritual realities that are always present, but usually beyond our conscious grasp. This raises a profound question. Are these experiences merely neurological anomalies or genuine glimpses of ultimate reality? Mainstream science often explains them as brain chemistry, spikes in serotonin, surges of dopamine, or altered neural patterns in the default mode network. And yes, those physiological changes happen. But perhaps, as many spiritual teachers and mystics have suggested, the biology isn't the cause. It's the conduit. In other words, just because the brain is involved doesn't mean the experience isn't real. Abraham Maslow argued that peak experiences and moments of cosmic consciousness actually represent the mind's healthiest, most fully actualized state, not a pathology. To him, these weren't hallucinations to be feared, but signs of human beings reaching towards self-transcendence. That final, often neglected layer he later added to his famous hierarchy of needs. The Urantia perspective goes even further. It suggests that these states of expanded awareness are not random, but are often responses to the thought adjuster's work inside us. That inner divine presence is constantly striving to broaden our perspective, to awaken us to the greater spiritual realities at play. This doesn't mean we should chase mystical highs for their own sake. Even Stanislav Grof warned of the dangers of turning altered states into spiritual entertainment. The goal isn't experience for experience's sake. It's growth, integration, and alignment with truth and love. The real test of any spiritual experience is what happens afterward. Do we become more compassionate, more grounded, more willing to serve others, more open to divine guidance? If the answer is yes, then that experience, whether it happened in a cathedral, on a meditation cushion, in therapy, or under a star-filled sky, has done its sacred work. As Jung would remind us, enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious. Meaning, the true purpose of these cosmic glimpses is not escape, but transformation, to help us bring more light into the shadowed corners of our everyday life, to align our small, human will with the vast, loving will of the divine. Because at the end of the day, cosmic consciousness isn't just about seeing stars behind closed eyes. It's about becoming a person through whom more light shines. Here, now, for the good of all. And if this chapter stirred something in you, help us reach more seekers. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Every day, we bring new reflections to help nourish your soul's journey. Chapter 14, The Divine Thread, How God Connects All Consciousness. Somewhere deep inside, most of us feel it, that subtle, almost unexplainable sense that everything is connected, not just in theory, not just metaphorically, but truly, profoundly, energetically, spiritually connected. The Urantia Book speaks of the universe of universes as a living, breathing, interconnected reality, held together not only by gravity or physics, but by divine mind, divine presence, and most intimately by divine love. In modern science, we're beginning to catch glimpses of this same truth. Quantum physics, with all its paradoxes and mysteries, suggests that particles can remain entangled across vast distances, affecting one another instantaneously, in ways that defy classical logic. Some physicists call it non-locality. Mystics have called it oneness for centuries. Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit priest and paleontologist, described this evolving web of consciousness as the new sphere, a global mind slowly awakening layer by layer above the biological and geological layers of Earth. For Teilhard, evolution wasn't just about matter. It was about consciousness, moving, growing, pulling all creation toward what he called the omega point, the final unification with the divine. The Urantia Book mirrors this vision on a cosmic scale, describing spiritual gravity, an invisible pull that draws all personality back toward its source. God, the first source and center. Carl Jung, too, hinted at this universal connection through his concept of the collective unconscious, a shared psychic field where universal symbols, memories, and spiritual archetypes dwell, shaping human experience across time and culture. And here's where it gets deeply personal. You, right now, are part of this divine thread. Your thoughts, your choices, your capacity for love affect not just your own soul, but contribute to the vibration of the whole. Every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, every choice toward truth becomes part of the larger spiritual fabric, a ripple that touches places and people you may never meet. The Urantia teachings call this the supreme being in time and space, the evolving, experiential face of God that grows and expands with every loving, courageous choice made by every conscious being across the universes. In a way, we're all co-creators in this unfolding cosmic story. And perhaps that quiet longing you sometimes feel at night, that sense of wanting to belong, to matter, to connect, is the divine thread inside you, pulling you home, pulling all of us home. When we begin to grasp this interconnectedness, not just intellectually, but experientially, something changes in us. We start to realize that our lives are not isolated. Our joys, our wounds, our healing, they all flow into a greater river of collective human and cosmic experience. The Urantia Book frames this as the evolution of supreme consciousness, a divine manifestation growing with each act of love, each spiritual victory, each honest prayer whispered in every corner of the universe. Teilhard de Chardin believed that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, but more than that, we are participants in a universe becoming conscious of itself. This idea echoes across mystical traditions. Hinduism speaks of Atman, the individual soul, being one with Brahman, the universal soul. Buddhism speaks of interbeing, the understanding that nothing exists independently. Sufis speak of losing oneself in the beloved, dissolving the ego to merge with divine unity. Modern physics, through concepts like quantum entanglement and the holographic universe, whispers of a cosmos where every part contains information about the whole. And yet, for all this grand cosmic language, the most powerful realization remains deeply personal. That God knows you. That God experiences the universe, in part, through you. Your unique perspective, your individual emotions, your personal history, they are not accidents of biology. They are threads in this vast, divine tapestry. Even your struggles, the doubts, the questions, the restless hunger for meaning are part of how the universe learns to love, to awaken, to stretch toward the light. The Urantia Book puts it this way: God lives in each of us, and we all live, move, and have our being in Him. This isn't just poetic metaphor. It's a description of spiritual physics. When you choose forgiveness over resentment, when you show compassion instead of judgment, when you pause to recognize the sacred in another human being, you strengthen the divine thread. You amplify the signal of love across the universe. This is why your spiritual growth matters, not just for you, but for all of us. Because consciousness is contagious. Compassion spreads. Spiritual courage inspires. And every time one person chooses love over fear, the whole universe shifts, even if only by a fraction of a degree. So today, as you move through your ordinary moments, remember this: you are part of something vast. You are connected, seen, known, and infinitely loved. And with each conscious, loving choice you make, you are helping to pull all of creation closer to the heart of God. Chapter 15, Science, Cosmology, and the Mystery of Creation. For centuries, science and spirituality were seen as adversaries, two competing languages trying to describe the same mysterious universe. On one side, empirical data, equations, telescopes pointed at distant galaxies. On the other, prayer, sacred texts, eyes lifted to the heavens in wonder. But something has shifted in recent decades as telescopes reach farther and microscopes probe deeper. Science itself has begun to whisper questions that sound almost theological. The Big Bang Theory, now widely accepted in cosmology, suggests that the universe had a definite beginning, an explosion of energy and matter from a single, unimaginable point of density. In that singular moment, time and space were born. Theologians couldn't help but notice. Genesis begins with, "Let there be light." And the Big Bang? An eruption of light, energy, expansion. Of course, cosmologists like Stephen Hawking and Lawrence Krauss have debated whether the universe could emerge spontaneously from nothing, without the need for a creator. But here's the paradox. Even defining nothing becomes slippery at the quantum level. The more we look at the void, the more it teems with possibility. Virtual particles, quantum fluctuations, probability fields. Paul Tillich, the great existential theologian, spoke of God not as a being among other beings, but as the ground of being, the very foundation upon which all existence rests. In Tillich's view, God wasn't competing with science for explanatory power. God was the reason there was anything to explain at all. The Urantia Book echoes this transcendent framing. It speaks of God as the first source and center, the origin point from which energy, mind, spirit, and even time itself emanate. And when modern physics introduced the idea of a multiverse, suggesting that our universe might be just one of countless others, spiritual thinkers smiled. Because for millennia, mystics have suggested that reality is far larger, more layered, and more complex than anything our senses can grasp. Could there be countless other realities? Dimensions beyond ours? Realms where life exists in forms we can't imagine? The Urantia Book speaks of a universe of universes, where layers upon layers of creation unfold, each governed by divine intelligence and cosmic order. Carl Sagan, speaking not from theology but from wonder, once said, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known." Perhaps what both the scientists and the mystics are glimpsing are different facets of the same infinite reality. And maybe when we stand under a night sky, feeling both tiny and connected, we're experiencing what Einstein called the cosmic religious feeling, that quiet, humbling sense that we're part of something vast, mysterious, and deeply meaningful. As our scientific tools grow more sophisticated, radio telescopes mapping the cosmic microwave background, particle accelerators like CERN unlocking the building blocks of matter, we find ourselves standing before even deeper mysteries. We've mapped the DNA of life. We've observed black holes. We've captured images of galaxies colliding millions of light years away. And yet, the biggest questions remain. Why is there something rather than nothing? What existed before the Big Bang? What breathes life into energy and intention into matter? Here is where the language of science begins to soften, and the language of spirituality begins to rise. Paul Tillich's idea of God as the ground of being offers a profound bridge between these two worlds. Tillich suggests that God is not a being within the universe, but the very foundation of existence itself. Not an entity competing with matter and energy, but the reason why matter and energy exist at all. This idea resonates with what the Urantia Book describes as the first source and center, the original cause behind all causality and the conscious intelligence from which all reality flows. Science gives us the how. Spirituality gives us the why. And perhaps both are necessary for a complete understanding of existence. Modern cosmologists like Brian Greene and Max Tegmark theorize about a multiverse, an infinite ocean of universes, each with different physical laws and constants. To some, this multiverse idea challenges traditional views of God, but to others, including many contemporary theologians and spiritual thinkers, it simply expands our awe. As Teilhard de Chardin wrote, "Matter is the matrix of spirit, and spirit is the destiny of matter." In other words, science explains the structure. Spirituality reveals the purpose. The Urantia Book encourages seekers to embrace both paths, to explore the stars with scientific curiosity, and to explore the soul with spiritual hunger, because both journeys ultimately lead us back to the same source. The moment we try to limit God to fit within human frameworks, whether scientific or religious, we shrink the infinite. Instead, we're invited to live with mystery, to stand in awe, to let wonder be our teacher. Einstein once said, "The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible." And maybe that very comprehensibility, that fine-tuning, that beauty woven into the fabric of reality, is the signature of a divine artist, a cosmic architect, a ground of being who still whispers to us through every star we see and every breath we take. Chapter 16, The Practice of Divine Presence. For many of us, the idea of connecting with God feels grand, almost too big, like something reserved for monks in monasteries or mystics lost in desert caves. But the truth is far simpler and far more beautiful. Divine connection isn't something that happens outside your life. It happens inside your ordinary moments. The Urantia Book speaks of God as infinitely near as well as infinitely far, present both in the heart of the cosmos and in the heart of every human being. The question isn't whether God is near. The question is, are we awake enough to notice? Brother Lawrence, a 17th century Christian monk, described this beautifully in his writings later compiled as the practice of the presence of God. Working in the monastery kitchen, washing dishes, sweeping floors, Brother Lawrence made each act an opportunity for connection. He didn't wait for silence or special ceremonies. He met God in the suds and the scrubbing in the service. This is where real spiritual life begins. Not on mountaintops, but in Monday mornings. Not in rare revelations, but in small daily choices to turn your attention toward the sacred. So what does this look like in practical terms? 1. Micro-meditations. You don't need 60 minutes in lotus position. Start with 30 seconds. Before opening your phone in the morning, place your hand on your heart and simply say, "Thank you for this day. Be with me in it." That's prayer. That's presence. 2. Breathing with awareness. As you sit at a traffic light, stand in line at the grocery store, or wait for your coffee to brew, pause. Take one slow, conscious breath. As you inhale, silently think, "I receive." As you exhale, "I release." This small act reconnects you to your body, your breath, and the source of life itself. 3. Acts of hidden kindness. Every day presents you with micro opportunities to embody love. Holding the door for someone, sending a text of encouragement, smiling at a stranger who looks tired. St. Teresa of Avila once said, "God walks among the pots and pans," meaning there's no moment too ordinary for grace. The Urantia Book describes true spiritual living not as withdrawal from the world, but as full participation in daily life with a heart turned toward God. Spirituality isn't something we add to life. It's how we live life, fully, intentionally, lovingly. And perhaps the most radical thing you can do today is to choose to see every moment as sacred. Some people imagine that spiritual connection requires dramatic gestures, long pilgrimages, weeks of silent retreat, or perfectly executed meditation sessions. But the deeper truth, echoed in both ancient texts and modern psychology, is this: small, consistent moments of attention change everything. The Urantia Book reminds us that God is closer than our breath, more present than our next thought, and always available to the willing heart. So how do we make space for this divine presence in real, practical ways? 4. Intentional prayer beyond words. Traditional prayer often follows a formula. Thanksgiving, requests, blessings. But what if once a day you tried simply sitting in silence, not asking, not thanking, just being in God's presence? This form of prayer, sometimes called centering prayer or contemplative prayer, has roots in Christian mysticism. Thomas Keating and Cynthia Bourgeault, both contemporary contemplative teachers, speak of this practice as consenting to God's presence and action within us. It's not about performance. It's about surrender, allowing God to meet you exactly where you are. 5. Journaling spiritual moments. Writing down small moments of spiritual awareness can build a long-term sense of connection. Maybe it was a moment of unexpected peace during a stressful day, or an intuitive nudge to call someone, or just the feeling of being deeply loved for no reason at all. Keeping track of these moments helps train the mind to recognize divine presence more easily. Carl Jung often encouraged his patients to track dreams and synchronicities, believing that God speaks in the language of symbols and moments. 6. Practicing gratitude as a spiritual discipline. Science now confirms what mystics have known for centuries. Gratitude shifts consciousness. By ending each day with just 3 things you're thankful for, even on hard days, you realign your mind and heart with the frequency of love. Brother David Steindl-Rast, a Benedictine monk, reminds us, "It is not happiness that makes us grateful, it is gratitude that makes us happy, and gratitude is always an open door to the divine. 7. Seeing others as part of God's presence. Finally, one of the most transformative practices is choosing to see the people around you, yes, even the difficult ones, as expressions of the divine journey. The Urantia Book speaks of every person as a child of God, carrying a fragment of the divine within. This means that every encounter, every interaction, is an opportunity for spiritual practice, a chance to pause, to breathe, to ask inwardly, how can I bring love into this moment? And when you live like this, something extraordinary happens. You stop seeking God only in special moments and start experiencing God in all moments, in laughter, in struggle, in the ordinary tasks of an ordinary day. Because at its core, spirituality isn't about escaping life. It's about entering life more fully with eyes wide open and heart deeply engaged. And that's where the divine waits for you. Not far away, but here, now, always. Chapter 17, Serving Others, Seeing God in the People Around Us. At some point in every authentic spiritual journey, the focus begins to shift from inward reflection to outward action, from personal healing to becoming a source of healing for others. The Urantia Book makes this transition unmistakably clear. Spiritual maturity is not measured by how much you know about God, but by how much of God's love you reflect to others. In other words, the most authentic proof of divine connection is how we treat people. Jesus, in his life and teachings, made this the central message. Whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. Spirituality, when it's real, doesn't stop at meditation cushions or church pews. It spills over into kindness, service, and radical compassion. The challenge, of course, is that the least of these aren't always easy to love. They're the coworker who frustrates you, the stranger who cuts you off in traffic, the family member who knows exactly how to push your buttons. But here's the spiritual truth that mystics like Mother Teresa, Thich Nhat Hanh, and the Urantia teachings all emphasize. Every person carries the spark of the divine, whether they know it or not. Mother Teresa often said, each one of them is Jesus in disguise. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, spoke of seeing each person as a continuation of life's endless stream of love and suffering, meaning that how we respond to others is how we respond to life itself. In Urantia language, every human being contains within them a thought adjuster, a direct fragment of God. When we serve others, we're not just doing good deeds. We're partnering with the divine presence already living inside them. And this changes everything. It turns a small act of kindness into a sacred moment of cosmic significance. It transforms an ordinary conversation into an opportunity for divine connection. So how does this look in daily life? It begins with small choices. Holding space for someone's pain without trying to fix it. Listening more than speaking. Extending patience when you want to react in anger. And above all, remaining open to the quiet inner promptings that often whisper. Reach out, forgive, help them, just be there. Because spiritual service isn't always dramatic. It's usually subtle, often unseen, but always deeply felt by the one who receives it. And when we act from this place, not for praise, not for recognition, but out of love, we begin to experience what the Urantia Book calls the joy of unselfish service. A joy that no material success can replace. A joy that echoes deep in the soul and connects us back to the source of love itself. True spiritual service doesn't require grand gestures. It begins in the unnoticed places, in the spaces where compassion meets action, The Urantia Book speaks of God's love flowing through willing human channels, reminding us that we become co-workers with the divine, not just when we preach, but when we love. Spirituality becomes practical when it becomes relational. When we begin to ask different questions during the day. Who needs encouragement right now? Where can I offer grace today? How can I reflect even a small part of the Universal Father's love in this situation? Carl Jung once said, "You meet your destiny on the road you take to avoid it." In the context of spiritual service, it often means that the person you'd least want to help may be the exact person through whom your own heart is meant to grow. The Urantia Book describes love as the desire to do good to others. Simple, profound, actionable. And doing good doesn't mean fixing everyone's problems. It means showing up fully present with an open heart. Sometimes that looks like making a meal. Sometimes it's sitting with someone in silence. Other times, it's giving without expecting anything in return. Mother Teresa often spoke about doing small things with great love. Washing wounds, holding hands, whispering prayers no one else would hear. Thich Nhat Hanh encouraged us to engage in mindful service, where even mundane acts like washing dishes or sweeping the floor could become expressions of love and mindfulness. The Urantia Book takes it one step further by reminding us that when we serve others with sincerity and love, we are also cooperating with the thought adjuster inside that person, partnering with God's inner work in their life. In this way, every act of kindness becomes more than kindness. It becomes a cosmic collaboration. Even the smallest ripple of compassion can create waves far beyond what we'll ever see. And here's the beautiful irony. When we stop focusing on our own happiness, when we pour love into others without agenda, we often find that our own hearts begin to heal. We discover that the love we give was never ours to begin with. It was flowing through us from the source. As the Urantia Book says, unselfish service is the badge of spiritual sonship. So as you step into your day, pause, look around, and ask, where can I be the hands and heart of God today? Because the face of God is waiting for you in the faces of the people around you. Chapter 18, Unconditional Love and Forgiveness. If there is one attribute most universally associated with God, across religions, philosophies, and cultures, it is love. Not just affection, not just kindness, but unconditional love. The kind of love that remains even when it's not deserved. The Urantia Book describes God as the source and destiny of love, a being whose nature is not just to love, but to be love itself. And at the heart of that love is forgiveness. For many of us, loving those who love us feels natural. It's not hard to show affection towards someone who treats us well, who validates us, who meets our emotional needs. But unconditional love, that's a different path, a harder one, a higher one. Jesus modeled this kind of love over and over. In his teachings, in his actions, in the final moments of his earthly life. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Those words, spoken at the height of suffering, remain one of the most radical expressions of divine love ever recorded. The Urantia Book expands on this by reminding us that forgiveness is not something God withholds until we earn it. It flows freely, constantly like sunlight, waiting only for us to step out of our own shadows and receive it. But here's the challenge. How do we live this way? How do we move from understanding unconditional love as a beautiful idea to practicing it in our everyday, messy human relationships? The answer begins with recognition. Recognizing that every person we meet is fighting battles we can't see, that hurt people, and that often, those who wound us are acting from their own places of fear, trauma, or ignorance. Martin Luther King Jr., in the midst of violence and hatred during the civil rights movement, said, "We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love." King understood that forgiveness isn't about minimizing harm. It's about refusing to let bitterness destroy the one who was harmed. Forgiveness, in this light, is not weakness. It's spiritual strength. It's the refusal to allow the pain of the past to dictate the story of the future. The Urantia Book echoes this with a powerful reminder that forgiveness is as much for the giver as for the receiver. Because when we hold onto resentment, we chain ourselves to the hurt. To love as God loves is to become willing, bit by bit, to let go, to create space for healing, for peace, for new beginnings. It doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing harm, but it does mean choosing to stop drinking the poison of unforgiveness and to let love flow again. Forgiveness doesn't always happen in one moment. Sometimes it's a process, a slow unfolding, an internal negotiation between justice and mercy, between pain and release. The Urantia Book describes God's love as persistent and unconditional, a love that continues to offer reconciliation, even when we reject it again and again. This invites a simple but life-changing question. What would it mean for us to love that way too? South African leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Desmond Tutu, who helped lead his country through the healing process after apartheid, often spoke of forgiveness as the path that sets both the victim and the oppressor free. Tutu knew firsthand that forgiveness wasn't about erasing history. It was about reclaiming one's future. He wrote, "Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about remembering and choosing to release the hold that the past has on you." In the practice of forgiveness, we don't deny the harm done. We simply refuse to let that harm become the author of our story. Modern psychology confirms this spiritual truth. Studies in neuroscience show that holding onto resentment activates stress pathways in the brain. It increases cortisol levels, disrupts sleep, and damages emotional well-being. Forgiveness, on the other hand, has been linked to lower blood pressure, stronger immune function, and improved mental health. In short, forgiveness heals not just spiritually, but physically and emotionally too. But what about those situations where forgiveness feels impossible? The Urantia Book offers comfort here too, that God understands the full complexity of human pain, that when forgiveness feels beyond our reach, we are invited to ask for divine help. Father, help me want to forgive. Sometimes that's where it begins, not with perfect willingness, but with a small, cracked open door. And as that door opens, something sacred happens. We begin to sense that forgiveness is not something we generate. It's something we allow to flow through us. It's a divine current, always present, waiting for us to release control and let it move. Loving as God loves is not about becoming superhuman. It's about becoming more deeply human, more aware of our shared fragility and our shared hope. As Jesus said, "Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." And as the Urantia Book reminds us, that in choosing forgiveness, we step into alignment with the most powerful force in the universe, love itself. So today, if there's someone on your heart, someone you've struggled to forgive, maybe start with just this: a silent prayer, a whisper, a willingness to let healing begin. Because when love moves, nothing stays the same. Chapter 19. The journey continues toward the Father. Every journey, no matter how transformative, eventually leads to a threshold, a place where the road you've traveled ends, and a new path begins. This book may be reaching its final pages, but your journey with the divine is only just beginning. Throughout these chapters, we've explored ideas from ancient wisdom traditions, modern psychology, philosophy, and the deep cosmology of the Urantia Book. We've asked hard questions, wrestled with paradox, searched for God both in the stars above and in the quiet spaces within. But no book, no matter how profound, can answer the most important spiritual questions for you. Because at the heart of every authentic spiritual journey, there's always an invitation to experience, not just to understand. Thomas Merton, the American Trappist monk and spiritual writer, once said, "We are not called to be successful. We are called to be faithful. Faithful not to dogma, not to intellectual certainty, but to the small, daily act of turning toward the light." This journey toward the Father is not about reaching a final destination where all mysteries are solved. It's about growing more comfortable with mystery itself, living with questions, allowing wonder to become a way of being. The Urantia Book speaks of the eternal adventure of moving from time into eternity, from imperfection into spiritual perfection, from the finite into the embrace of the infinite. And yet, even now, before you reach some imagined spiritual mountaintop, the Father is already present, here, in this moment, in your next breath. Rumi, the Sufi poet, captured this paradox so simply. What you seek is seeking you. Perhaps that's the greatest truth of all, that while you've been searching for God, God has been all along searching for you. So pause, take a deep breath, and let yourself feel the gravity of that love, the pull of that divine longing, calling you forward. As you close this book or finish this listening experience, you may find yourself with more questions than answers. That's not a failure. That's the beginning of real spiritual growth. Because the truth is, God is not something to be concluded. God is someone to be encountered. And that encounter will be as unique as your own fingerprint. The Urantia Book reminds us that each soul's path to the Father is deeply personal, shaped by your choices, your struggles, your small victories, and the quiet moments when you simply sit in stillness, wondering if anyone is listening. But here's the promise. Someone is listening. Always has been. Always will be. So now, the journey shifts. From reading about God to walking with God. From talking about love to practicing love. From seeking spiritual answers to living spiritual questions. Maybe your next step will be as simple as waking up tomorrow with a renewed intention. Today, I will be a little more open, a little more kind, a little more willing to trust the process of my own becoming. Or maybe it will mean reaching out to someone you've been distant from. Or finally, sitting in silence, allowing the divine to meet you right where you are. Let your questions remain open for now. What does it mean for me to walk toward the Father in this season of my life? Where is love asking me to show up today? What does spiritual growth really look like for me in this messy, beautiful human experience? You don't need all the answers. You only need a willing heart. As the Urantia Book gently reminds us, faith is the open door to spiritual growth. So let your faith, no matter how small, be enough for today. Step forward. Stay curious. Keep your heart soft, because this journey, this upward, inward, and outward journey, is far from over, and the one you're seeking is closer than you ever imagined. Maybe you started this journey looking for answers, or maybe just hoping for a little peace. Perhaps you came here with questions about God, about life, about yourself. And while these chapters may have offered glimpses, insights, gentle nudges toward truth, there's something you've probably felt by now, that no book, no teacher, no philosophy can fully contain the experience of the divine. Because God is not an idea to be mastered, but a presence to be experienced. If there's one thread running through every chapter, every story, every reflection we've shared, it's this: you're not alone. You never were, and you never will be. The longing inside you for something higher, that quiet ache for meaning, that pull toward love, forgiveness, connection, that's God, already moving toward you, already within you. So let this be your invitation to step forward, even without all the answers, to sit in silence and listen, to love someone, even when it feels hard, to forgive, even when it feels impossible, to believe, even when doubt lingers. Because the real journey, the one that matters, begins right here, right now, with your next breath, with your next choice. And as you continue, remember this: God is already walking with you every step of the way. And if this journey resonated with you, help us spread this light to more hearts. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Every day, we'll bring new reflections to help nourish your soul and support your spiritual growth. Gratitude.